Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Basement Bible Breakdown. We are here on part 3 about the second coming and refutation of the preterist paradigm. In the first video, we talked about the historical record and we demonstrated that there is no historical record whatsoever of Christ returning in AD 70. Of anything of those happening, there's no declarations by anybody. Number two, then we demonstrated through the argumentation of the dating for the book that it has to be the late date. The early timing dates do not work. Whatever scenario that you want to bring out. And if anything, maybe I should have brought out the very fact that in Revelations 19, it says that Jesus, when he returns with his army, he captures the false prophet and the beast and throws them alive into the lake of fire. Well, if Christ returned in 70 AD and he threw the beast alive into the lake of fire, then how could he have done that if Nero committed suicide in 68? See, that's another inconsistency. There's no way you can make Nero living till 70 or change the wording around to sit there and say, well, he wasn't actually thrown alive. I'm sorry, but that's what the text says. And if it is so specific, John is saying he was thrown alive into the lake of fire. That means what? He's living. He's not dead. He cannot be dead in Hades or someplace else. But it says that the two of them were thrown alive into the lake of fire. I'm sorry, you can't escape that language. There's no way to make it spiritualized or anything else. Because if I take two people and I throw them into a lake, I'm sorry, that's how the exact wording. Hey, I took John and Peter and I threw them into a lake. Alive. Why alive? Because it's being specific that they were alive and now they were going to their deaths. That's the whole point of that. They were alive, now they've been thrown in, now they are dead. So, in my next presentation here, and hopefully I'll keep it a little bit shorter than 15 minutes, I've argued this a little bit before and I've talked about it a little before, but the main thing is I want to bring up this, and this might be a two-parter just on this here. When we talk about the background then for claiming an AD 70 is the Olivet. So in the Olivet, the stance is that there was a promise of a second coming found in the Olivet. Now I'm going to try to keep this very, very simple. When we look at the term Son of Man coming on clouds, that is a statement made that people, dispensationalists, futurists, all kinds of people claim. See, that's talking about a second coming. Therefore, the Olivet talks about a second coming. Second coming didn't happen in 70 AD. Therefore, Olivet is all future. That's where the dispensationalists go wrong. The preterists, of course, saying in that generation, therefore, all the events had to happen in 70 AD, which then would include a second coming. But when we examine those words, Son of Man coming on clouds, as Don Preston has done, the whole phrase of coming on clouds is Old Testament language for the coming of judgment. It never requires a person to personally come. Never says that. Don Preston argues that very perfectly. We shall meet him in the air in his other books, and he talks about that absolutely clearly. And according to how the word parousia is used, it has two meanings, two uses. And one of those Don Preston absolutely agrees with is that the first meaning has to do like with an Old Testament where God came in the clouds in judgment and had nothing to do with him coming personally down to this earth and being here. So that settles that point right there. That word parousia that is being used by Matthew has nothing to do with the personal appearance or coming of Jesus here himself to earth. So the phrase then, Son of Man coming on clouds, Jesus is quoting from Daniel 7:13 and 14. Now, what does that mean? I'm going over some other notes here, and I'm going to pull it up just to make sure that I look at it and say it the right way. It says, 7:13, I saw in the night visions and beheld, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. So where's the Ancient of Days? We have to say he's in heaven. You can't say that the Ancient of Days is here on earth. Ancient of Days, of course, is a description of God himself. He's up where? In the heavens. And it says, the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven, there came one like the Son of Man. and he came to the Ancient of Days. Well, where was the Son of Man that he was not in the same place and was coming to the Ancient of Days and being presented to him? See, the whole argument there and the understanding of that is that Christ, after his ascension, what did he do? He went up and sat on his throne. The following verses in 15, 16 all talk about he sat down at the right hand of the Father, and he was given a kingdom, a dominion, and thousands upon 10,000 served him. This is where Christ ascended, sat down at the right hand of the Father, and became king. And he was to rule until he made all the last enemy under his footsteps. Remember, all of the enemies were to be made his footsteps. So when he brought all of them under, he was to rule. So here he is, ascending to the Father. After his resurrection, he ascended. This is where he's being presented for him. Now, is this a whole thing about judgment? When you go back to verse 9, 10, as I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels burning fire. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. This is the picture in the scene that we get from Revelation 20, the great white throne judgment. So again, this passage is not about a second coming. It's about judgment. Now, when we go to Matthew 26, what does it say? How did Jesus respond when they asked him who he was and all? What did he come back and say? He said, from this point forward, after this, sometime after this point, he's saying, you will see the Son of Man, me, sitting at the right hand of the Father, coming on clouds. So what's he saying there? You will see me. Okay, here it is. You're going to see judgment come. And when that judgment comes on Jerusalem and it's destroyed, you know it's from me who is sitting at the right hand of the Father. I'm the one that Daniel is talking about. I'm the one who is the Son of God. I'm the one who is equal with God because I will sit with him on his throne. And Caiaphas tore his clothes. Why? Because he understood this passage to be a messianic passage. It was talking about the Messiah. And if it was the Messiah who would be up there, that would be the king. He was claiming to be the Messiah, claiming to be equal with God. Therefore, that is why he tore his clothes. Now, is that consistent then with what happened in 70 AD? Yes. The judgment came. It was all destroyed. He saw it with his own eyes. And when it all happened, you don't think he's going to sit there and look back and say, this happened because we killed the Messiah. It's hard to get away from that. Hard to get away from that. So when we sit there and argue about the Son of Man coming on clouds, anytime you see that in the gospel messages, it is not talking about the second coming. It is talking about the judgment that is to come. The way that Matthew used the word parousia is not talking about a second coming. It is talking about the coming of judgment. In the same way, the word parousia is used by Paul in other verses in the New Testament. It talks about the parousia of Timothy and of Titus. People have come. In 2 Thessalonians 2:9, there's a parousia of the lawless one. So parousia is not only used for Christ himself who comes, but if other people have come. It is never defined by the word presence. It always defined by present after being absent. In fact, it's translated one time where it's talking about Paul, his bodily presence is strong when he's here, but when he's away, when he's away, he's very strong, but when he's here, he's a pussycat. That's the claim kind of making, that his letters are always strong and weighty, but when he gets here himself, he's a pushover. So that's how that word is definitely used in that different context than from what Matthew used. We've got to understand this. And also I'm going to make another point here that makes really stupid, some people have made some really stupid comments about this. Joel Sexton is making the comment, Don Preston and others. They argue that 2 Thessalonians 2 and all that is based on the blueprint of Mathew. I can't make this any more clear than I can now. Despite Ed Stevens' attempts to try to say when these books were written and everything else, the historian, the real scholarship by not just Ed by himself. See, that's the problem. When you've got one person who goes and says, this is when all the books are written and all this, or Robinson, he does the same thing, all of this. But then you go back to other scholars and they sit there and say, no, 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 that's not quite true. Yeah, that could be possible. This isn't true. What happens is the majority of the scholars go back and say, here's where you flawed and this is where you messed up. Now you're claiming this and this and this, but that's not quite right. And when I've got 20 people telling me that 2 plus 2 equals 4, and then I got this guy telling me 2 plus 2 equals 22, I'm going, okay, your logic and thinking is wrong. It's real easy for me to see that. And if 20 people come up to me and say, it's not 22, you don't take the 2 and 2 and put together and you make 22, that's not how you add. The way you add is 2 plus 2 equals 4. Okay, that's how you add the proper way. And this is what I'm arguing what preterists do. 2 plus 2 equals 22. It doesn't work that way. It just simply cannot work. So the Son of Man coming on clouds, the judgment that is coming, it is all about them seeing it, having it happen in that thing. So my claim here then is the Olivet is completely fulfilled according to even the historians, according to Eusebius, to Barnabas and all that. The prophecies of the Olivet was fulfilled. They saw the Son of Man coming on clouds of judgment. Not the Old Testament reference to it, the way that Mathew uses it, the way that Paul is using it. There is a change in how Paul is using the word, and it's very common for Paul to make up words, to use words, to bring it into a context, into a Christian context, and change it, because his whole goal was, it is not Caesar who is Lord, it is Jesus who is Lord. All right, thank you for hanging in there with me for a little bit, and I'm asking you, go back and look, Daniel 7, 13 and 14, Son of Man coming on clouds, is not about a second coming, but it is about Christ who ascends and sits at the right hand, and from there sends judgment on Jerusalem for vindication of what? His vindication. Because when they saw it was destroyed, they're going to have to say it was because we killed the Messiah. All right, thank you for watching, for hanging in there. You guys have a good night, and I'll see you on the flip side.